So I'm based in Austria, as James already said, and working at the Know Center, which is a research center for data-driven business and big data analytics. And we have done quite a lot of different research projects in the past. We existed for the last 20 years, started with a knowledge management research center and has rebranded itself, I think, 12 years ago or 10 years ago to the topic of big data, AI, etc., etc. Very multinational team, a lot of partners, and located in the center of Austria, in the nicest city of Austria. If you want to visit it, it's only the second largest, but it's the nicest one. No biases here, of course. And yeah, so we're about 130 heads working on research projects and industry projects with a wide variety of businesses and a wide variety of industries. My main areas of work, I would say, are the financial and insurance area, energy and mobility, as well as a little bit of tourism and a little bit of production and automation. I think that's the main areas where I've done work with regards to innovation management, especially, and in particular with regards to idea generation, idea management, valuation, and basically the question, what should we do with our data? That's basically what I'm about. Yeah, and with regards to that, I would like to stress that I am not a researcher. In my main field of work, I'm more of a practical guy. I'm the one going there with hammer and nail and trying to fix your door, instead of arguing about whether the door should be one with round edges or just regular edges. So I hope I can give you some insights on that particular notion of practical work. But to get started, I would like to bring to your attention that there is a fundamental decision in the supply side of businesses which has been haunting people for probably centuries and will continue to haunt them for a few more centuries, if not until the end of the civilization, which is, should we make something ourselves or should we really buy it? And the fundamental difference, I think, between the two is the question whether you want to take more risk yourself or have somebody, let somebody else have the risk and just pay them for it, and also pay a little bit in the process with control that you lose. So basically a question of whether you do it yourself or whether you should outsource and buy things from external vendors. And that can also be translated to the here and now and to the seller side of things, which I've now tentatively coined the refine or sell dilemma, I would say, or at least question. And it's structurally similar because you have two concrete options that you can choose from, but it's on the demand side, basically, sorry, on the sales side. And we ourselves have seen in the last 5 to 7 years, I would say, a similar question coming up with regards to businesses and their data. So the question now basically becomes, should we, as somebody who has potentially valuable data, refine them ourselves or just sell them? And it boils down to the question, what kind of role do you want to play in the data economy? Do you want to be a company that's primarily concerned with generating and selling raw data, or do you want to take a bigger bite of the cake and work through the data value chain yourself and deal with all the risk, deal with the uncertainties of raw data, and potentially gain more reward as you basically, let's say, in-source activities that you are taking off the shoulders of your customers, distill the data yourself, and gaining potentially higher value insights. And then, of course, the most important point, making business with these kinds of higher value insights, so to say. So the triangle, the pyramid that you can see here is presupposing that transferring or transforming data into information and information into knowledge is something that increases or accumulates value from that raw material that you can then use to generate business value and provide a benefit or knowledge in the broadest sense to your customers. Now, of course, I know that this pyramid is riddled with terminological issues, and there is no clear distinction between data, information, and knowledge in some cases. Also, that different types of languages like German and English treat these topics also quite differently, and also the terminology is quite different. So please don't take this as a hard boundary, rather a gradient, and please keep in mind that this is not a generally accepted, there's no generally accepted difference between information, knowledge, and data that you can find and put your finger on, that anybody, or sorry, that everybody in the world will agree on. So it's important to stress that what you consider data, information, and knowledge is probably something that you need to put into the glossary of your own institution, and that you need to like make your own organization subscribe to, so that you have one common understanding of these three key terms, I think, in the 21st century. So we talked about refining data, we talked about selling data, and of course you can also do both, because the nature of data actually makes it possible that you can use these data and basically drive the exploitation of data by analyzing them and going from data to information to knowledge. But in the same time, you can also take the raw data and make a copy of them and sell them to somebody. So there's the third option. It is refine or sell, or actually doing both, which is a nice touch and a generally accepted practice in hardcore innovation management, would say, to think outside of the box and just take both options. So that's option number 3. But essentially, what's the kind of role that you want to play in the data economy? And there's been quite a nice graphic from IBM from the year 2016, where they were attempting to outline the different kinds of roles that companies can take in the data economy. And I think it's quite fitting, and also still bears some value today, 7 years later, or 6 years, actually almost 7 years later. I would say that the crux of the story here is that companies can take one or more roles in this data economy, and each role comes with a different set of strategic, operative, organizational, technical, and also process-related challenges. So whatever you take out of this role bucket, and whatever the roles are that you see your company working with, you need to bear in mind that whatever you take out of the bucket will also enforce certain kinds of requirements on your organization that you need to adhere to and that you need to work with. And that's also one of the arguments why you could also go the, let's say, easier route of selling data, because you don't need to take as much out of this role bucket, and you don't need to take as many risks and as many requirements onto your shoulders than just, well, selling the data actually. And from our point of view, especially from my point of view, up until 2019, there was a heavy focus, at least in Austria and I think the general Central European region, there was a heavy focus on data markets. The idea was that you could just go online to a website and have an online shop floor for data on a website, go through quite an easy and quick and efficient checkout process, and then just get data. And that was very appealing to people, because back then, it sounds like it's 50 years ago, it's only 3 years ago, but back then people were really starting to understand that they need to build their own data asset to actually be able to do meaningful analytics and get some business value out of that. But from my experience, I have to say that the first attempt, the first real hype cycle, if you will, with regards to data markets has spectacularly failed, at least from my perception, because, well, there's actually 2 issues with data markets that I've distilled myself over the years, and also that have kind of been confirmed by the preceding speakers, which are now, one, kind of like you buy the cat in the bag if you buy data, and it's both a cat in the bag for the seller and the buyer, in the sense that if I think I have valuable data, then I maybe not want to sell them because, well, they're valuable and I can do something with them to get more out of this value. And if I just have data and I don't know what the value is, then there is a chance that somebody else will find something interesting in the data and that I will miss out. So there's a fear of missing out in the sense of that I don't want to give away where I don't know whether it's useful or not, right? So the seller maybe thinks to himself, should I really give away the data because maybe there's something in there that I just have missed it up until now. And the buyer might be reluctant to actually buy data because, well, they can't look into the bag. And please believe me, behind this symbol here, there is an actual cat on the slide. So the buyer doesn't really know whether he or she will be able to get what they paid for, basically, because they haven't seen the data yet. They have seen some description, maybe a few lines, which was the general practice on this data market, show a few lines of the actual data set, maybe anonymize them if they are GDPR relevant. And you still don't know whether you can do what you want to do in terms of complex analytics because you have only seen a very, very small subset, a very, very small sample of the data set that you are attempting to buy. You don't know whether you will actually get your money's worth out of this data because you don't know what the data are like before you put money on the table. So there's a reluctance to buy as well. So that's the first issue. Both sides kind of think there's a cat in the bag, but they don't really know. And that's leading to reluctance and risk averseness, especially in conservative industries like banking or insurances and so on. And the second one is actually what we found is that the most interesting data that companies usually have is something about their dearest stakeholders. It's either the buyers or the sellers that they have information about, or transactions with those buyers and sellers. So in essence, suppliers and customers. And nobody wants to lose the trust of these stakeholders just for a few more quick euros or quick dollars, if you will, right? So experience has shown that the more conservative the industry or the economic region is, the more sensitive the people are about their data, and the more reluctance there is to selling these kinds of data. So just imagine your smart meter data are being with someone that you don't really trust as a consumer. You won't be happy, and you probably switch suppliers if your supplier is continuing this practice with giving away your smart meter data, even though it might be GDPR relevant and they might not really be allowed to do that. So sensitivity and trust also not only bears down to the consumer side, but also in the sense that it might not make sense to just shop on an anonymous shop floor without really getting to know who is selling these data. There might be something more to it, and that leads me directly to these new kinds of ways of B2B cooperation that are now being proposed, especially from the funding agency side. So somebody asked before if there's like an agenda in the funding agencies to drive this data exchange, and I would say there is, but not in a bad way. It's just the attempt to say, we think that there is islands of interesting data out there. We want people to explore other people's islands as well. And that makes sense from a systems and economics point of view, but it's not as easy a task as people decided. First, it was data markets didn't really work out up until now. Now it's more of a bilateral or multilateral cooperation between companies to come up with useful services together. So at the very least, my 2 points from before show that exchanging data needs a more intimate basis than an online shopfront. It needs more than the pure exchange of data. It needs cooperation. And luckily, as I said before, funding agencies, at least in Austria, have caught wind of that and are promoting and funding multi-stakeholder use cases stretching over various companies. In essence, they're saying that you need to work together. There needs to be some kind of trust. There needs to be data security, also in a technical sense. And with that basis, you can go on and have shared benefits by analyzing data together or by using data from various kinds of sources to get some shared benefit for somebody else to really get to a multi-stakeholder use case. So it's less about trading data back and forth. Currently, it's more about exchanging data in a cooperational sense to build a common use case and then share the benefits, the financial ones in that case, when somebody buys the service. And that's actually a monetary model that we've seen pop up in the last 2 years is revenue sharing, especially if there's a big company involved that has lots and lots of data, like telecommunications providers, and that they don't want to bear the risk of having their brand name basically, I would say, put into the wrong light if there is a let's say a shitstorm with a service that they have provided on basis of that data. So they basically outsource a service to a startup, and if they succeed, they can get a share of the revenues, and if they don't, well, it wasn't their company, they just provided data. So it's also, once again, the thought of risk mitigation ingrained into these kinds of new ways of B2B cooperation. But as we have also touched the topic of ethics before, one big issue with these kinds of corporations is, well, who's to blame if somebody goes wrong? And that's an open question, I would say, and maybe might be one that you need to ask or at least answer on a case-by-case basis to figure out who's to blame. So the trends that the recent trends, or the failure, failure sounds too extreme, but the apparent failure of the first hype cycle of data markets has led to new forms of cooperation in a sense of mutual working on use cases. And now I would like to make a left turn and direct you to what I'm actually doing on my workplace, which is we have different kinds of services directed at figuring out what these kinds of use cases could be that people want to do with data. And we are prepared to do that with one party for one customer, but also for multiple parties that basically donate data to a common pool, if you will, and then want to do something useful with that. Could be either a smart data set, as has been mentioned before, or really a service accessible through an API that just provides you with some insight. And the most important part, so there's a lot of important parts in that process, ranging from you need to know what your strategic direction is, you need to know what the technology can do, you need to figure out what the best use cases are that you can do, you need to figure out whether they really technically work, you need to figure out how to deploy them back into the process, etc., etc. There's a lot of things that you need to consider, but the one that we started with 5 years ago was, what should you actually do with the data? What is a useful, meaningful, and valuable use case that you can build on top of raw data that somebody actually wants to have, be it somebody internally to improve a process or somebody externally to build their own product, their own service, or improve their own business processes with it. And there's in my opinion, a big misconception, especially with regards to what complex analytics in the sense of artificial intelligence and machine learning can do. And that is that people see them as solutions. And the classical way of approaching a problem-solving process is, first you identify a problem, and then you build a solution to, well, no surprise here, actually solve the problem. But with AI, in my opinion, it's a little bit different, because AI already is a set of solutions to certain kinds of data problems. So you don't get to look for some kind of problem and then decide what kind of AI solution you build. It's rather that you have a toolbox that we call AI, with a certain set of, let's say, simulated cognitive skills in this toolbox, and then you get to go out into the world with your toolbox and look for problems that you can apply the wrench in your toolbox on. So you need to figure out what the correct problem to solve really is. The problem is not the solution, the problem is the problem, or identify the problem, to be more precise. So that's actually the biggest misconception, I think, with regards to figuring out AI use cases. Is it's mainly 90% of it is mainly figuring out what is a valuable problem to solve to somebody, and especially with regards to AI, what can I apply my toolbox to? And the second biggest misconception that I want to outline here before telling you how we approach the process is that you need to actually figure out what your strategic focus is and where do you want to go with complex data analysis. And I've put it here in a Venn diagram. On the right-hand side, we have data exploitation potential, which I've coined that to kind of describe that there is potential in your data that you need to figure out what it is. You need to figure out what you can do. Can you do a clustering analysis? Can you do a prediction of some sort? Can you do a classification of some sort? You need to figure out what the potential of the data is, what you could potentially do with the toolbox to exploit that data. But on the left-hand side, you have this towering influence of the strategic focus of the company that actually really, on a very, very fundamental level, restricts the things you should do with data. In a sense that if your company is trying to be better at communicating with its customers, you need to exploit data in a way such that it supports this strategic focus and not just do anything with it. And that's also a realization that people kind of forget when there's a technical innovation, is that you need to actually do something valuable in the first place. And secondly, you need to do it so that it fits to your company, that it fits to who you want to be as a company, what your organization wants to look like in the future. That's, I think, two very big points that people tend to forget because they're excited about AI. We can do anything with it. And technically, we are close to doing almost anything provided the data. But on an organizational sense, 90% of the things don't make sense because they don't fit to the company. So you need to fit the toolbox to the problem, and you need to fit the toolbox with the problem to the company. You need to figure out in what room do you want to turn the screw with the wrench, and is it the correct room to be wrench screwing in it, screwdriving in it, sorry. Okay, so that's that. And finally, from a service point of view, very, very simply, what do we do? Actually, it's not rocket science. It's really a simple process that is deeply ingrained and well-researched in innovation management. Is first you generate and collect ideas, and then you do a cost-benefit analysis. And that's actually on a certain degree. My preceding speakers are doing something quite similar, right? They're making you think about what a customer maybe could do with data, and then you try to estimate the benefit of these kinds of data to figure out what a good, fair assessment of the potential value of data is. And here it's quite similar. First, you need to generate or collect ideas with what you can do with data, in the sense of what problems can you solve with the data that you have. That's actually the fundamental question behind it. And very, very importantly, documenting is key here. You need to document them in a standardized sense so that after 3 weeks, you can read the things that you have come up with and you still understand them. And also you can give this to somebody else and he or she also understands it in the same way that you do, because at some point after doing all these thought experiments, you will need to give that to a developer and he or she will need to figure out how to really implement this in code. So it does need to fit to a business perspective as well as a programming perspective. And finally, once again, strictly divided from the idea generation and collection is estimating the benefit of a use case and estimating the cost. And since we are very, very early here in the process of doing something, it is enough to do it on a qualitative basis. You don't need to put hard euros on it, because in most of the cases, these use cases will change until they go far enough to be put into code. So it's important to get a rough prioritization at the beginning with regards to benefit and cost, but it is not necessary to put hard euros on it. And I would challenge you. I'm sorry, could somebody please mute the microphone? It's really annoying. Thank you. So it doesn't make sense to do a quantitative analysis in terms of euros at the beginning, simply because it is not worth the effort. The use cases will change and you will have a very, very hard time to do that with very roughly explicated use cases very early on in the process. It only makes sense if you really boil it down to 3 and you can't for the life of yourself figure out which of the 3 you really want to do, or you have to present it to a board that is giving you money to actually do a use case, actually implement a use case, and then you need to put hard euros on it. But in the beginning, when you have 15, 20 use cases, it's never worth the effort to put hard euros on it. And that's basically what we have been helping companies do. We provide a systematic process to come up with use cases and evaluate them. We have the tools to support them with that. We have the documentary, the document templates, etc., and help them to go through the process. And we usually come up with about 20 ideas for applying AI to data in one iteration of the process. And usually from these 20 ideas, I would say 15 will not work because of various reasons. And that's not because the people have bad ideas, it's because the requirements are quite high to get a good idea. A good idea is something that is very, very special, and it's not something that just falls off a tree. It's something that you need to work on. You need to figure out what the right problem is. You need to figure out whether it fits to your company, and you need to figure out whether it is really valuable to somebody and whether it's worth the risk of doing it. And this involves more than just having an idea at the table in the cellar yourself and thinking to yourself, well, that's a great idea. Because these ideas usually aren't the great ideas. They're just your brainchilds that you would potentially love, I would say, but it needs the scrutiny of a hopefully democratic process of evaluation and scrutiny to figure out what a good use case is. And now I'm actually done with my presentation, and I would be very excited to take your questions. Thank you. Sounds like no questions.
Yeah, I was just going to say, if anyone wants to ask any questions, feel free. I don't think we need to worry about raising hands. You can just go ahead. Okay, well, I mean, I guess that just means you did an excellent job of explaining it all.
I hope so. Not scaring people off and explaining it well, I hope. But yeah, I think take the chance of using the tool that my preceding speakers have given to you and really give it a whirl. I think it's not an easy thing to do. It sounds easy. It might look easy when it's put into a formula already, but figuring out how to do it is not easy. And which actually I talked to my boss just recently about exactly that. I would say it's a hard thing to do, and I'm looking forward to the workshop and figuring out how somebody else did it. So give it a whirl, see if it makes sense, and if it doesn't make sense, attempt to do something better. And I will look forward to the results of your own attempts, and would like to evaluate them. Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Yeah, so my name is Carmen McGorty. I'm from the Insight Data Centre in Ireland. I have a quick question. Maybe you addressed this already because I was a little bit late, but the IP, so if you're working with industry to generate use cases for the industry partner, who owns the IP in that scenario?
Always depends on the type of project we're doing. We're doing research projects, and these are funded research projects, partly funded research projects by an Austrian research agency, and then the IP is usually shared, but I think there is contractual potential here to separate the really, let's say, the key parts from the research worthy parts, I would say, because usually those don't need necessarily go into the same pot, because they address different kinds of audiences. Or if we do an industry project, the IP is with our customers.
So even in terms of scoping out the use cases, would you normally have a contract in place at that point?
Yeah.
Right.
So we want our customers to see that coming up with good ideas is not something that is easy. And if they come to us and ask for our help, they already made the first step to realizing that, actually. Because they figure out that they can't do it alone, right?
Okay, all right, thanks.
Welcome.
Okay, unless there are any more questions, which I don't see anyone raising their hand or taking the floor. Thank you very much, Christof, for the presentation.
You're welcome.
I was recording it, so if that's okay, we'll be sharing that with the participants today. Yeah. Follow up. And thank you very much to all the speakers and all the audience today for your involvement and for the feedback that's been given. I will be in contact to share the materials, and also I'll put the links again to the websites in the chat for the projects so that there's more information available. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of your days.
Thank you. Have a nice day. Thank you for organizing.